Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today I'll be doing a comparison between the MSI AMD Radeon RX 5700 XT 8GB Evoke overclock graphics card, quite the mouthful, versus the NVIDIA Palit GeForce RTX 2080 Ti Gaming Pro OC. Now these cards are separated by over £774 in difference of value, which is ridiculous, and realistically they shouldn't be going up against each other, but I own both cards and I've always wondered, what do you get for paying that extra money in terms of performance? So this is why I want to be comparing the two cards today. In an ideal world, I'll be comparing the RTX 2070 versus the 5700 XT. So anyone who wants to jump in the comment section and say this isn't a fair comparison, we're well aware of that. This is just an experiment, so if you're interested in the results, stick around. So, you know, I bought the RTX 2080 Ti almost 2 years ago now, and it's still over £1,174 in value. It's crazy to see how there's been no price drops whatsoever at this end of the market. Well, the 5700 XT coming out and offering amazing value, but it doesn't quite get you 4K performance. But if you play at 2560 by 1440, you know, you may have a choice to make. So I'll be showing you some results at 1440p. Let's see how the two cards get on. So kicking things off with Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Both games played at 2560 by 1440 TAA as the anti-aliasing method, and I'm also using the highest preset just for simplicity. Looking at the results of Shadow of the Tomb Raider, you can see that the RX 5700 XT was able to average 89 frames per second, while the NVIDIA RTX 2080 Ti was able to score 125 frames per second. So that's a 36 frames per second difference, which is quite considerable. And if you game at 1440p with a high refresh rate monitor, that's definitely going to go a long way, considering that the RX 5700 XT is scoring under 100 frames per second. Next up is F1 2020, going to be using the ultra high preset with TAA as the anti-aliasing method, of course, again playing at 2560 by 1440.
We've held position on lap 1, that's not great, but it's not terrible. Stay focused.
As you can see, the RX 5700 XT was able to score an impressive 125 frames per second on average, but the RTX 2080 Ti clearly above with 167 frames per second on average. Now that's a 42 frames per second difference, which is not such a big deal when you're already getting 125 frames per second, but for someone who wants the extra power for whatever reason, maybe to go to a higher resolution, the RTX 2080 Ti is going to provide you with all the performance you need. Next up is Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Very demanding or unoptimized game, you make the choice. Either way, it takes a lot of GPU performance to run this game over 60 frames per second, playing at very high preset this time, and let's see how the two cards get on. Looking at the results now for Assassin's Creed Odyssey, you can see that AMD RX 5700 XT averaging 81 frames per second on average, which is very decent, while the NVIDIA RTX 2080 Ti averaged 94 frames per second. Now this is very close, a lot closer than I would have expected, but there was a slight CPU bottleneck on this title. You can see that the RTX 2080 Ti never really utilized 100% GPU utilization, but even so, it's a very close result. Again, too close. Moving on to Red Dead Redemption 2. Again, another ridiculously demanding game, this time played with custom settings. I actually used the Hardware Unboxed hub settings, so shout out to Hardware Unboxed for giving people the optimized settings that they should be using. So many settings that I had to show it off, which I don't normally do. But playing it again at 2560 by 1440. Looking at the results now, you can see that AMD RX 5700 XT was able to achieve 75 frames per second on average, which is really good, and the RTX 2080 Ti getting 99 frames per second, so only a 24 frames per second difference this time, which is not that of a big deal if you're playing at 1440p and both cards are not achieving anywhere close to 120 Hz or higher for high refresh rate gaming. So a bit close this time, maybe too close. Moving on to Far Cry 5 now, playing at resolution of 2560 by 1440 using the Ultra preset with the anti-aliasing method of TAA and also the high resolution texture pack. Looking at the results now, you can see that the RX 5700 XT averaged 107 frames per second, while the NVIDIA RTX 2080 Ti averaged 132 frames per second. So that's a 25 frames per second difference in performance, and you can tell that there was quite a lot of performance left on the table there. AMD CPU seems to struggle with Far Cry 5, and you can see that's why the NVIDIA RTX 2080 Ti was unable to utilize the GPU 100%. Quite a lot of CPU bottleneck here, but a good result for the RX 5700 XT, getting very close to the RTX 2080 Ti. Moving on now to the very demanding Division 2, both played at 2560 by 1440 using the Ultra preset. Looking at the results from the Division 2, you can see that the AMD RX 5700 XT was able to average 77 frames per second, while the NVIDIA RTX 2080 Ti averaged 109 frames per second. Now that's a 32 frames per second difference, which is definitely considerable in such a demanding game like this. What's more interesting is you can see that the GPU actually only had 91% utilization from the NVIDIA side, and the AMD was completely maxed out at 99%. So a further 9% left on the table potentially. So, faster gaming CPU could even get more performance out of the card. So finally we come to Ghost Recon Breakpoint. This time we'll be using the Vulkan API, running at 2560 by 1440 with the very high preset. I've disabled sharpening and the injector as well, so you are playing at native 1440p. So the results are in, and you can see that the AMD RX 5700 XT was able to score 76 frames per second on average, and the NVIDIA RTX 2080 Ti getting 124 frames per second on average, and that is probably the biggest increase I've seen throughout this whole benchmarking session. 48 frames per second difference, and that's what you'd expect when you're paying over £774 over the 5700 XT. So that pretty much rounds it up. So what have we learned? Well, I've learned that the NVIDIA RTX 2080 Ti really does provide extra performance in the range of 25 to about 40 frames per second difference depending on the game and this resolution. However, it isn't as much as I would have liked. I mean, it is over £774 more to actually acquire one. Yes, it has perks like real-time ray tracing with RTX support, but that's not for everyone, so it all depends on what you want from your GPU and what resolution you want to play at. I feel that the RX 5700 XT is a bit of a mixed bag. It's not quite fast enough for high refresh rate 1440p gaming, and it certainly isn't fast enough for standalone 4K graphics card. So you know, it does 1440p very well at ultra settings. You will get over 60 frames per second, but you won't be able to play at 4K at any kind of high preset and get over 60 frames per second. But for £400, that is amazing value. I wish I had this instead of my, I don't know, GTX 980 back then when I bought it. So that would have been a perfect card for me. But that's pretty much it for me, guys. I don't know what you guys think about the comparison. I think that this may help someone in the future if they don't want to spend that much money but unsure about what to expect from these types of levels in GPUs. But generally, I would say if you want to play 4K single GPU, you're gonna need something like the RTX 2080 Ti. But if you want 1440p high refresh rate gaming with a few tweaks, you could probably go with a RX 5700 XT and get amazing performance too. So it all depends on what you want to do. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.